like to call our work session to order. Mr. Parker, could you please call the roll?
Ms. Daniels. Ms. Green.
Present.
Mr. Mattson.
Here.
Mr. Majors. Ms. Rawls.
Present.
Mr. Rodriguez. And Ms. Bowers.
Present. Thank you. Please note for the record that Councilman Majors is excused this evening. We will move right into our committee business. The first committee business, or the first committee that you will hear from this evening, is the Administration Committee. We have 3 resolutions for discussion. We will begin with Resolution 59 of 2022. Mr. Parker, could you please read it into the record?
Yes. Resolution 59-2022. A resolution to recognize the 600 block of Woodbine Street as the Reverend Billy Gray Way.
Thank you. This resolution was requested by City Council. I know that Mr. Carl Singleton, who isn't here on behalf of the administration, has been working with Reverend Gray's family and friends to make this a reality. So I'd like to thank him in his absence. But at this time, I would like to invite Mr. Dred Scott and Mr. Mike Cooper to come join us. Okay. All right. There is a little gray button in the middle of the microphone in the front, just to make sure that it's on so everybody can hear you. And then wait. Yes.
That's not the middle president.
Oh, sorry.
I'm just kidding. Praise the Lord. Good evening.
Okay. Good evening. You can begin and sharing,
Yes.
introducing yourself and any information you'd like to share.
My name is Dred Scott. I'm a city resident. I reside at 1310 North 16th Street. I emphasize that for some here. 1310 North 16th Street, Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. And I'm speaking on behalf of Michael Cooper, who is in the hall also, and a number of William Penn High School alumni from 1962 through 1967. Because we find ourselves in the midst of a toxic culture where trauma surrounds and arrests us and pulls us into a whole lot of negativity, it's encouraging to witness a caring and capable representation of our city's leadership. And everyone that is on city council are people that I voted for, so it affirms my good sense. For this, we want to thank you. There are many people who never met Billy Gray, never knew him the way we knew him. And there are many of us who have been highly influenced by the model that he set, by the sacrifices that he made, and by the advocacy that he was always involved in. For him, it was always about the youth, about the young people, and about the community. Many of us realize looking back, and that's the only way you can really connect the dots looking back. We realize that we grew in wisdom and stature, individually and collectively, because of the positive influence on our youth. We never outgrew the lessons of the why, which were the principles and values of our community. They were reinforced because we had overlapping circles of concern with the schools, the homes, churches, and communities being on the same page and espousing the same values and messages. We think of this commemoration of the spirit of Billy Gray in naming a section of 6th Street abutting the Camp Curtin YMCA, along with some other activities that we hope will reach fruition, that it will provide all young people and our families and community something to strive for and be sustainable for the well-being of the people of Harrisburg and the vicinity. I'd like to add, President Bowers and the rest of our council members, that our original intention was to have a portion of 6th Street from Forest to Woodbine on 6th Street to be named after Reverend Billy Gray as the Reverend Billy Gray Way, for its significance and for its for his work with the YMCA, the Young Men's Christian Association. That's what it stands for and represents. And we don't know if the resolution can be amended or if it has to go back into administrative council, the administration committee, to be amended to reflect that portion between Forest and Woodbine on 6th.
Thank you very much. Just for everyone's reference, right now, the placard denoting Reverend Billy Gray Way would be at the corner of 6th and Woodbine, on the side of the Y, running north to south on 6th Street. So you will be able to see it that way. I do see some of Reverend Gray's family here, and it looks like you have a beautiful collage. Would you like to introduce yourself and maybe hold up the collage in some way?
President Bowers, I'd also like to acknowledge Mr. Caleb Jackson, our unofficial historian who has anecdotal, pieces regarding Reverend Gray also.
Okay, good evening, Mr. Jackson. I will invite you to speak in a moment. Thank you. Oh, you can come up here to this microphone.
Good afternoon. How are you doing today? Hopefully you all had a blessed day today. I am Reverend Marla Gray. I am Reverend Billy Gray's daughter. With me is my son, JJ Massey. He works for Central Dauphin as a paraprofessional with special needs kids. This is my daughter, Sequoia Gray McCullough. She works as a manager at American Eagle right here in Harrisburg. I'm also here in Harrisburg. We moved several months ago. And this is my husband, Asa, a striplet. Growing up with my dad was so awesome because I got to meet people from all across the United States. As a matter of fact, when I was getting ordained some 20 years ago, Dad came to McKeesport for my ordination, and he happened to run into someone he used to box with. Now, who goes over towards Pittsburgh and then has your father run into someone that he boxed with? And my mom used to tell stories about when they went on their honeymoon on a boat, he knew the captain. So obviously, she didn't get the honeymoon that she was expecting, but yet, and still, it is awesome that we got to see so much. My father was the first Black lifeguard for the YMCA. And I did bring just little examples of things that he did. He did tours for historically Black colleges and universities. He had different programs through Youth Urban Services, which was right on 6th Street there. Everything from back to school nights to university fairs, things of that nature. And since he at one time had been president of the Interdenominational Ministers Conference, these fairs went through all different churches, Black and white, throughout Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. And he did that for a number of years, well after I went to college. My father also received a doctorate from Hack, hence why he's Reverend Dr. William M. Gray. And as a graduate of the class 2000, he stated, "God can do anything but fail, and so can you." He used to have a sign that hung up in Youth Urban Services that said, "I am somebody." And I also brought from the Senate of Pennsylvania, just one of the many awards that my father received. I have to admit, after my father passed, he had so many awards that there was no way that we could keep them all. But it was just a blessing that he consistently gave to the community and also was recognized. Dave, you hold up there. This is one of the things that my father always had hung up. You see, my dad lied about his age, said he was 16 and went into the war at 16. He boxed in England, France, and Germany. He was an MP. And one of the things that he used to say to me was that when they were visiting the former concentration camps and things like that, no one called him a Negro or any other N-word. They said American, American. And he said, I had to go all the way to another country to be considered an American. So when he came back, he was 18. He could have automatically graduated from high school. Instead of that, my father went back to high school, studied so that he could graduate. And he graduated on June 8th, 1948. And my father was also a Golden Glove national champion. He traveled all across the United States. He took kids to the Apollo Theater to not just hear people sing, but to enter if they wanted to. He did so much more than boxing, lifeguarding. He was also a Boy Scout troop leader. As many of the I'll call them young men because that's what they were at that time.
Thank you.
As many of the young men can attest to, that he touched so many lives. They used to have a father and son dinner for men of color to bring their sons so that they could learn more about the community and respect themselves and to look in the mirror and recognize that they truly are somebody. My dad always said, make sure you get your education to back up what you speak. Hence why I have 4 degrees, technically 5, but we'll say 4. And I'm doing my PhD also. I never preached in my father's church because I wanted to get it on my own. I didn't want anyone to say that I achieved the things I achieved because of him. But yet and still, he still is an awesome role model. And when he passed, it was so wonderful to have so many men and women of all different races to at least come and recognize him. And I'm so thankful that there are still people here in Harrisburg who recognize what he had to offer. But we are hoping that naming this street will give some of the people who still don't recognize that they are somebody, to let them know that somebody was somebody who opened up those doors. It's called urban revitalization, urban redevelopment, however you want to term it. I call it just love. Everyone deserves it. And sometimes people don't get to know that they are loved. And they're also not always shown the way to go. So I want to thank you all for just hearing everything I had to say. I want to thank you for recognizing him. And I want to thank you just for Harrisburg recognizing that we have more than just athletes. We have some awesome artists who are here in Harrisburg, who do everything from artwork for Nickelodeon. If you know Brian Hickman, he is now in the National New York Museum, and he's a young man. There are so many more examples. And we need to make sure that we are showing the community that there are positive examples so that we all could walk in love and make Harrisburg what it was created to be. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing. Really appreciate it. And I love the collage, as I mentioned earlier. Thank you. I'd like to invite Mr. Caleb Jackson to speak on Reverend Gray.
Good evening, everyone. And thank you, Reverend Honorable Bowers, for letting me speak a few words. Because on Reverend Billy Gray, now Reverend Billy Gray and I graduated together in the 1948 William class, which, as we say, was the only class that beat John Harris 3 years in a row in football. That we always so proud of. And as his daughter said, he had been in William Penn earlier and dropped out at, I think, at the age of 16 to join the Army. And while he was in the class of 48, he was boxing, so he couldn't participate in any sports. But I understand he did run track, I think, in his sophomore year in William Penn, which would have been in 1946. He said so much about this great man. Well, I remember him on the playground. I remember him in Second Baptist. Then the Second Baptist really in those years, and probably both baptized by Reverend William. Baptized with Reverend William. Yes.
Mr. Jackson, can you please speak into the microphone?
Oh,
I'm sorry,
yes.
I just want to make sure everyone
Okay.
that's watching can hear you too.
All righty.
Thank you.
And Billy Gray and I lived in 1000 block of 6th Street. Billy Gray lived in the 1100 block of 6th Street. My father was a barber. His uncle was a barber. So we had so much in common. I definitely endorse this recognition of naming something for Billy Gray. And I would have hoped that you could have done the 600, the 12, the block in front of the Cam Curtin Y MCA. But apparently, as you mentioned, you're just going to put it on the corner at 6th and Woodbine, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Well, good. One of the things now, sometimes I'm called Harrisburg's historian. But guess who mentored me into being a historian? Yes. Reverend Billy Gray. Now, I don't know if he still has all his notes, but he was interviewing people. He interviewed me, he interviewed my father, a lot of the ministers. I don't know where these works are, but perhaps the family has those. Great. Well, then we talking to Mike. We need to get those maybe to some designated person or group in Harrisburg so that we can get these. Now, as you know, we have a monument on Walnut Street that has 100 names of African Americans lived in the old 8th, 7th, and 8th wards. But basically, what we tried to do there and what we did was to recognize people that lived between 1850 and 1920 in Harrisburg. So that's why you don't have some of these later people on that monument. By giving Billy Gray recognition, by naming a way for him on Woodbine Street, this does compensate for that. So these are the people that were missed on the early monument, but we do have them, a street named for them. And I have a collection of the streets so far, the streets, the parks, and other things that have been named for African Americans probably in the last 25 or 30 years. And I'd be glad to share those with City Council sometimes. So thank you very much. And in closing, I just say that Billy Gray was a great person to work with. He was one of my mentors at the Foster Street Y. And then to have the mentor come back and actually graduate with me was an outstanding event in my life. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Oh, yes.
In case you would like to know, Harrisburg did what's called an Eye of the Prize for Harrisburg, and my father was one of the guest speakers. It was done by PBS. It used to come on the TV every year, and then it became every 4 years, and I cannot tell you the last time I remember seeing it. However, it was done by PBS, and it was on prize. We talked about Harrisburg and some of the civil rights, and I think the awesome thing is that one of the things we don't know is that back when the civil rights movement happened, in order to do where you sit, where the blacks went into the diners and sat, waiting to be ordered, you actually had to audition for that. And my dad said he auditioned for that. However, when someone spit in a woman's face, he went to punch him and he said, oh, I can't do this. I can't do this. And so he talks about just the learning process and some of the things that, you know, you had to learn how to do as a person of color. And so PBS Channel 30, I think it used to be 33, does have that. And Scotty Pitts, who used to work there, had a copy.
Oh, okay.
I went to college.
Okay, nice. Thank you.
Graduated.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for that. I did want to know before I open the floor for any questions or comments from my colleagues, we can change the location. The corner of 6th and Woodbine was what was discussed prior to drafting the resolution, but we can change it and I will discuss further with the mayor. So that's an easy fix. I did want to read the resolution, so if you wouldn't mind just indulging me, then we'll open the floor for questions. So this is Resolution 59 of 2022. A resolution to recognize the 6th block of the Reverend Billy Gray Way. Whereas Reverend Dr. was born on January 28th, 1929 in the city of Harrisburg. And whereas Reverend Dr. Gray was a water safety instructor at the Camp Curtin YMCA, formerly located on Forster Street in Harrisburg. And whereas Reverend Dr. Gray was a successful boxer for over 10 years and a Golden Glove boxing champion. And whereas Reverend Dr. Gray, Harrisburg historian, rated on several books written about Harrisburg. And whereas Reverend Dr. Gray was a heralded activist and community organizer in Harrisburg during the civil rights movement. And whereas one of the many honors Reverend Dr. Gray received for his community service throughout his lifetime was presented by the Honorable George Gekas from the United States House of Representatives. And whereas Reverend Dr. Gray served as associate pastor and deacon for Second Baptist Church of Harrisburg, as president of the Interdenominational Ministers Conference, and as pastor of the First Baptist Church of Cornwall, Pennsylvania. And whereas in his position as youth advocate and mentor, Reverend Dr. Gray touched hundreds of lives in the Harrisburg area through countless hours of service, where his combination of athletic skills and divinity proved an effective model of outreach and rehabilitation. And whereas Reverend Dr. William M. Gray Sr. died peacefully on December 18, 2013, leaving behind a historic legacy that serves as an inspiration to the Harrisburg community. Now, therefore, be it, and it is healed by the Council of the City of Harrisburg that the top of Woodbine Street in the city of Harrisburg be recognized as Reverend Billy Gray Way. Thank you. I think the resolution emphasizes everything that all of you have said about Reverend Gray. We thought, of course, in that robbery to street naming done in his honor. At this time, I will open the floor for questions or comments from my colleagues. I will begin with Councilwoman Rawls. Do you have any questions or comments on this resolution?
Thank you, President Powers, and good evening to Reverend Gray's family and friends. And I don't have questions today. That I love it when I can see streets named after martyrs in our community. It gives our youth a chance to see names of people who've done something in our community. And now they have their phones all the time. So being able to research that and be proud of that. And it gives a chance for family members to look up and see that name on the street and be proud. And that's what we're missing a lot in our community, being proud of us. We matter. So just thank you.
Thank you. Councilman Madsen, any questions or comments?
Yeah, just a quick comment. I do apologize. I had to leave real quick while you're giving your presentation. I'm sorry for that. I had a conflict or work thing. I had to just talk real quick, but I always love to hear the history of our community and the players that made it happen. And it's an inspiring story. I wish we would hear more of these. And I'm glad that we can recognize his legacy through this action, and wish we could do more, honestly. It's important to just celebrate our history. And so thank you for sharing his story and advocating for this and coming out tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Vice President Green.
Thank you, President Bowers. Thank you for coming out tonight. I don't have any questions, kind of echoing the sentiments of my colleagues here. I think it's really important for us to talk about the history in Harrisburg and surrounding Harrisburg so that it doesn't get forgotten. I'd never heard this story before, so just listening to it tonight, it's like, wow, it's so much about Harrisburg, and I'm born and raised here, that, you don't know. It's something that's not discussed. So anytime I get a chance to hear more about the people in Harrisburg and all the things that have been done before us, I think it's important. It's important for us to teach our children these things. So this is just another way of, keeping the history of Harrisburg alive and keeping the conversation going, because, that street name and that street sign will spark someone saying, who is that? I remember when I looked to see who Scott School was named after. I had no idea. It was just kind of one day I was driving by and like, where did they get this name from? And I decided to look it up. But it sparked something, right? It made me pass that information on to someone else. So I think it's very important. I thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you. Councilwoman Daniels, any questions or comments?
Yeah, sure. I echo the sentiments of my colleagues. I really appreciate the effort. I guess my question is more for the administration. If the request was for the 6th Street name, for it to be on 6th Street, like what happened that made the resolution look different than what the request was?
This is what I received. I wasn't in that discussion. So it came from council, this request, so I don't know.
That was the initial request. So the span from Forrester to 6 was different, came later after the resolution was drafted. But the initial request was 6 and Woodbine at the corner so that it would be near the Y. That was the fixture.
Oh, okay. So it was just like a change in the, okay. I just wanted clarification.
Yes, that was it. Lastly, Councilman Rodriguez, any questions or comments?
Thank you, Madam President. No questions, but I do want to make a statement because every day I feel like I reset and I feel like I owe the community everything every day, right? Like I've done nothing the day before and, I just owe it. And hearing the story is the similarities in my own family. I just pray when God is done with his work with myself, and I could leave half of the legacy that your family has left, your dad has left for your family. And then just to hear how the future's going. The young man is a paraprofessional in the districts, and you're on 4 degrees going to your PhD. Like I applaud you and your family. And it's the least I feel as though that can be done. But hearing the story, I mean, even taking the students to Apollo Theater, I mean, we're talking about in the righteousness of like Michael Jackson and I mean, New Edition and Steve Harvey, and you can go on and on and on. So for the youth to see that and get a reflection and a thought like I can be up there as well. And to hear the boxing stories and just the legacy that was left. I mean, I feel just like my colleagues do. I wish I would have heard the story sooner. But that just shows how rich that the Capitol really is. And we should yell it every day. We're proud. This is the Capitol. We have great individuals and our history is rich. And I just applaud you in any way I can help. And I'm pretty sure my colleagues feel the same way. Hats off and thank you for all your work. Absolutely.
Thank you so much. So I move to add Resolution 59 of 2022 to our legislative session agenda. Colleagues, I will likely be making a motion to amend it following discussion with Mayor Williams. I will go a little out of order, so I have to apologize in advance to Mr. Davidson. We have one more ceremonial street naming that I'd like to introduce prior to discussion on Resolution 61. So I'll now move to Resolution 63 of 2022. Mr. Parker, could you please read it into the record?
I'm sorry, I got caught up with all the history. Resolution 63-2022. A resolution to recognize the 600 block of Harris Street as Judith C. Hill Way.
Thank you. This resolution was also written at the request of City Council to honor our first Black City Councilwoman, Ms. Judith C. Hill. I've invited her son, Mr. Jeffrey Hill, to be present today. Not sure if you'd like to come and share any words about your mother.
Good evening.
Good evening.
My name is Jeffrey Hill. I'm the only son of Judith C. Hill. This is my best friend and brother, Pete Baltimore. This is my lovely cousin, Jocelyn Barbie Hicks. And my big brother, cousin, James Fountain III. My mother was born in Harrisburg, May 14th, 1928. She lived on Cowden Street initially, I believe. I was talking to one of my aunts, Cowden Street, and it's right there around Wallace Street and then near Harris Street, which is where she spent like her teenage years and what have you. So it's really nice that Harris Street is going to be the street that's named after her because that was her block. She lived between Wallace and 7th on Harris Street. Mom was a proud graduate of William Penn High School, 1946, and she always spoke very highly of. I remember his Cadillac that had those boxing gloves on it, you know, right over there on Cumberland Street, right? Yeah. So we were all proud. So it's so nice that, you know, this is happening at the same time. Mom had an academic scholarship for Virginia Union University, so she went down there. She pledged Delta Sigma Theta, 1949. She graduated 1951. And shortly after that, she met my father. He was stationed at Indiantown Gap. I guess they used to go up there for USO parties at Indiantown Gap when the Korean War was going on. So they got together. He had a job. He was from Springfield, Massachusetts. He was a chemist. They moved up to Canada. I was born in Ontario, Canada. And my dad worked for a few different companies. We moved to Montreal, we moved to Toronto. Eventually, mom and dad broke up. She moved back. She taught up there for a while. She actually taught French in Montreal. We moved back here in 1965. And mom began teaching at Webster. Then, of course, the 68 drama occurred. And as you all know, the schools ended up merging. Mom went from teaching to being part of the administration that actually organized the merger of the schools in William Penn and all of that. So she was involved then, and she was always, one of her main phrases was always get involved, you know, get involved, do something. And so she was all about the church, the community. She worked really hard with the schools, you know, with the merging of the schools and what have you. And then, of course, once the whole merger stuff was done, she became the dean of students at John Harris campus when I was in high school. So that was a little difficult, you know what I mean? Trying to stay out of trouble with guys like him. And so every now and then I had a little trip down to mom's office, you know, just to teacher would be like, hey, I'm gonna send you down to your mom, straighten you out. So anyway, my sister and I, Michelle, she graduated 73, I graduated 74. Shelley went up to Rhode Island School of Design. I went to Northeastern in Boston. And that's when mom really became involved in the community once we were gone. I mean, she was already out there and moving and grooving. But when we went to college, I believe it was 1979 was when she ran for city council. But I think she initially, she managed one of the first, I'm trying to think of the, well, she was at OIC, but also she, who's the one brother that was on city council, he's frat, had the Seventh-day Adventist church down. He was, I think he was the second Black city council man. Little tall brother, and West Plummer. Was it West Plummer? Yeah, West Plummer, West Plummer. So she managed West Plummer's campaign when he became city councilman. And then, you know, the next term, he managed her campaign. And that's when she became the first Black city councilwoman on Harrisburg City Council. But they were also very political. You know, she worked very hard in the, at that time, you know, most Blacks were Republicans. So, you know, she was very active with Republican women in Pennsylvania. She was on Drew Lewis's campaign when under the Reagan administration, when he became Secretary of Transportation, and Wes Plummer became the Civil Rights Director for the Department of Transportation. And then he brought my mother down as the in charge of women's affairs for the city, for the Department of Transportation under Drew Lewis and Wes Plummer. So she did that. And then she came, when she moved back to Harrisburg, then she was, I think, doing training with the state and what have you, but still really involved with the church. She was involved with Church Women United, and she was president. She was, I know she was president of the Harrisburg Camp Curtin Y for a while. She was, you know, just really involved in church and school. And then later on, she became, she got elected to the school board too. Later on, you know, that was probably in the 90s. But yeah, she just lived her life. But you know, but at the end of the day, mom was a teacher, and she was always rooted in that for the kids. And you know, I had people that I grew up with, people that I went to high school with. That was that. Oh, that's your mom. She was the best teacher I ever had. And all through her life, even, when she passed away, there was still people coming up to me telling me, you will never know how good your mother was to us, to everyone that she knew, that she touched. And all my friends, and this is one of my best friends here, Pete Baltimore, I want him to say a few words.
Sure. Mr. Pete.
Good evening. I feel honored to be here in your presence on behalf of my best friend Jeff Hill in this resolution honoring his mother. She was a wonderful, wonderful person. I remember when Jeff and I first became friends, I immediately felt at home in their house. I immediately felt at home. And, she would offer, and I accepted, dinner quite often. She was a fabulous cook. And I do remember that she was committed entirely to her family. Not only to her family, but as Jeff mentioned earlier, to the students that she came into contact with all through high school. She was somebody that I looked up to when I was trying to stay on a straight and narrow, despite the best efforts of her son, who often led me astray, but that's another story. And we just had some of the best times of our lives through high presence in our lives. She was a rock. She was a steady presence. I'm still learning of some of her accomplishments over the years. And, I just know that she stressed education. She really, truly loved her students. Started by my wife in the early 2000s. My wife was Katrina Baltimore. And she started a school and she wanted to hire someone retired. And Mrs. Hill stepped up and she was one of the best teachers they had. She was teaching, Jeff, 70?
Yeah, she was in 70.
Still teaching, still loving children and guiding them. I'm just honored to this community. It has a look. I can imagine, well, I've been in a situation where I've been the only Black person in the room many, many times, but in city council, that was probably back then, that was probably monumental situation she was facing. And I'm sure she faced it with dignity, pride, and confidence. And I'm just proud to see this city council reflecting some of her legacy as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Would you guys like to speak or? Okay, all right. Well, thank you for coming.
I just want to say that she was an encourager. She was my older cousin, but I called her my aunt. And she was an encourager. She always encouraged you to be better, to want more, to do more. She kept trying to get me on different things, but and now I find myself because she was an icon, I took that into my whole life as wanting more and then I became a pastor. And that's one thing I always say, you can do better, want more, be more, and that was from her because she was such an encourager. She always wanted you to do more and to be more. It's like, there is no stopping, keep reaching for the highest. So that was my auntie.
I love that. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Similarly to the last resolution, I'd like to read it before opening the floor to my colleagues for questions and additional comments. So we have before us Resolution 63 of 2022, a resolution to recognize the 600 block of Harris Street as Judith C. Hill Way. Whereas Miss Judith C. Hill was born on May 14, 1928 in the city of Harrisburg. And whereas Miss Hill was a product of the Harrisburg public school system, having attended the former William Penn High School. And whereas in her lifetime, Miss Hill was a devoted and loving daughter, sister, aunt, friend, mother, and grandmother. And whereas as a lifelong member of Mitchell Memorial Church, she continued her support and membership at Camp Curtin Memorial Mitchell United Methodist Church, excuse me. And whereas Ms. Hill was a tireless educator in the Harrisburg School District, having taught at the former Wickersham School, serving as Dean of Students for the newly merged Harrisburg High School, and having served on the Harrisburg School Board. And whereas in 1980, Miss Judith C. Hill was sworn in as the city of Harrisburg's first African-American city councilwoman, serving as chair for the Parks and Recreation and Public Safety Committees during her tenure. And whereas Miss Hill was a proud, lifelong member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. And whereas Ms. Hill served in numerous roles throughout her lifetime, not limited to a presidential appointment as staff assistant to the Director of Civil Rights for the United States Department of Transportation under Secretary Drew Lewis. And whereas Ms. Judith C. Hill peacefully entered eternal life on April 8th, 2014, leaving a lasting legacy of service and dedication that serves as an enduring source of inspiration to the residents of the city of Harrisburg. Now, therefore, be it, and it is hereby resolved by the Council of the City of Harrisburg that the 600 block of Harris Street in the city of Harrisburg be recognized as Judith C. Hill Way. Thank you for indulging me. I wanted to read the resolution, and some of us sitting on this dais are literally standing on your mother's shoulders. So we're grateful for her being the first. We're blessed that she was not the last, but her voice and her impact definitely are still alive today through her rich legacy on this council and the impact that she made as chair of Parks and Recreation and our public safety committees. At this time, I'll open the floor for questions and comments from my colleagues. This time I'll begin with Councilman Rodriguez.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here this evening. Mr. Baltimore, I know you and your family, and if your mom was anything like their family, then man, I wish I would have had some conversations with her and soaked up some game and some knowledge, because she sounds like a phenomenal woman. And I was actually going through some photos the other day, and I didn't realize it at the time, but your wife was actually my kid's teacher that graduated them at Michaela's Place. And I was around Ms. Baltimore often and didn't even bring it up, so I got to show her the picture. So it just goes to show you the tradition of the thinking, of the pattern, of the positivity, and being a product of it and benefiting from it. My family, myself, the community, this council is just a blessing to hear these stories, and where a lot of us get our strength from and our energy in the Harrisburg way. It's just, I thank you guys for leading the charge, your mom, and those before. Even hearing the story about the Cadillac with the gloves, I could see it, I could visualize it, right? Turn the corner, you see the gloves kind of shake a little bit, but it's just amazing to hear. I mean, we're talking about the Dean of John Harris. I graduated in 2003, so like just to hear it. I know there's a lot of other stories that go with it, and I look forward to hearing more. But definitely, I'm sure council feels the same way. Have my full support, and I look forward to meeting you formally and hearing many other of the great stories of the works of your mom. So thank you, Madam President.
Thank you. Councilwoman Daniels, any questions or comments?
No, I don't have any questions. I think the last resolution, similar comments apply to this one as well.
Thank you. Vice President Green?
Thank you. I don't have any questions. Pretty much the same thing I said before. We'd love to see the history around us, love to hear stories and just kind of continue to build off of the history of Harrisburg, but you can't build off of what you don't know. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Madsen.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. And as a teacher, and she's getting on in years, and if it's in their blood, they don't stop. And my mom's still going. And no, you're right, they just keep teaching. So yeah, that was an amazing story to hear. And yeah, thank you so much for coming out tonight and sharing.
Thank you, Councilwoman Rawls.
Thank you, President Bowers. It was just lovely hearing the story of Ms. Hill. Once you start speaking of her, I realized that I had known her in some way, just from family speaking about her. Also, yes, she worked with my dad. The names start becoming familiar. You know, her being so I know that I have come in contact with her, and it's just to say how great Harrisburg is. We all know each other in some way. We may not know it, but even had you two shared about, you know, some similarities you had and how your parents knew each other. Harrisburg's just so rich in its history that we just don't know so much. And I can't wait to see every one of our streets paved with a name of someone who has left a legacy here. And this is a great start. So kudos to everyone who had something to do with this. I'm proud of us. So thank you.
And I just want to say thank you to the council and to Danielle's efforts on behalf of our mother. It's really, just my heart's full. My heart is full.
Thank you guys so much for being here tonight. 22 to our legislative session agenda for next week. But thank you. Thank you all for being here, both family members, friends, our Harrisburg historian for sharing. I really, as my colleagues have said, our history is great. And if we don't remember it, if we don't recognize it, we'll be doomed to repeat it. That's good. Other ways it's not. I think that's what George Santayana once said. I also wanted to note for the record, I think Mr. Parker was filled with the history too, and Mr. Scott as well, because John P. Scott is named after their father. So I wanted to note that great-grandfather, his great-grandfather, his okay, well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Final resolution for the administration committee for discussion tonight, 2002. Mr. Parker, could you please read it into the record?
Resolution 61-2022, a resolution appointing Nathan Davidson to serve on the board of directors of Capital Region Water, a municipal authority.
Thank you. Mr. Davidson has joined us. If you wouldn't mind taking a few minutes to introduce yourself.
Yes, thank you. Yep. Well, first off, thank you, Madam President and members of council. It's a pleasure to be here with you this evening. Just take a quick minute to introduce myself, give you a little bit of my background and what brings me here to see you all tonight. My name is Nathan Davidson. I'm born and raised just outside of Hershey, Pennsylvania, Dauphin County. Graduated from Messiah College over there on the West Shore. And in 2015 chose to come to Harrisburg and live in the city. And I've been here for, what's that, 7 years now, going on 8. Met my wife and we live here with our 2 dogs. you know, it's funny, it's interesting hearing about family so much tonight, and the influences our parents had on all of us. You know, my father always told me that government is a public trust, and the public servants are the trustees and the beneficiaries are the people. And that's something that he instilled in me from a young age. And that stuck with me for a long time. And that's what brings me here today. My interest in the environment, I'll start there. Started at a young age. I remember hiking on the Appalachian Trail up near the DeHart Dam, learning there to leave your campsite better than when you found it. And as an adult, sustainability and stewardship are important values for me. Something I learned in college about creation care, caring for the environment around us that sustains us, that feeds us. And looking to the future and the family that I'm hoping to raise and build here in the city of Harrisburg. Creation care is again very important. Some people say we're in a climate emergency. I tend to agree. And you know, back to that idea of public trust and public service, it is incumbent on all of us to leave our communities better than when we found them or when they were given to us. So part of that is just lifting my hand up and volunteering to serve in the community to make it a better place for the next generation and the generations after that. Oftentimes I'm reminded of the 7 generations that I walked through the Peace Garden on the river, and think about the impacts that we make here today, whether it's in public service, a board position, a reverend, a teacher, you know, or just people in the community standing up to make a difference. Those things matter down the road. My day job, I work in state government. For the past 4 years, I've worked in the legislature as a legislative aide. It's an exciting time for investment in infrastructure, and exciting time for investment in preserving our environment and sustaining it for the next generation. I'm sure you are all aware, but for those of you watching, maybe not, there's been a recent infusion and interest from both the federal and the state governments in our infrastructure projects, in sustainability projects, and environmental stewardship projects. So it is an exciting time for those types of things, things that I'm passionate about. And it's something that when presented with an opportunity like this is something that I'm excited to bring my professional background and knowledge and the skill set that I have there to benefit our community here and more broadly in the city and outside the city of Harrisburg. I'm sure you're familiar with several of the programs, both for stormwater and sewer projects, for clean streams, but those are just some of the things that are newly available and will be available over the future that I would hope to put myself to hard work to bring to the community. And I'll just wrap up with some of the values that bring me here today. I talked a little bit about my father and the things that he taught me. He was a physician, and in the Hippocratic Oath, it begins with first to do no harm. And I think that's important for public servants, people who are entering public service, whether an elected position or an appointed position. Is the first thing to do to recognize out of a sense of humility is that this is something that's been preserved and passed on from, you know, prior servants, prior officials, and generations before us. There were sacrifices made by them to bring us to this point, and there are going to be sacrifices that we will have to make to move the community forward. But that idea of starting with first do no harm is, I think, fairly important to me. And I think the other thing that's important for me and some of the values that were passed on to me from my father and others who were influential, you know, preserving our democracy starts with everyday citizens standing up for what's right, standing up for the stewardship of public assets, protecting our public funds, and working with our neighbors together in a way that benefits all of us. So those are some of the things about me. I'm happy to answer any questions. I wanted to keep it fairly brief and 30,000-foot level, but talk about my background, what I do for a living, some of the things that brought me here today. So thank you for the opportunity, and I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Before I open the floor for questions from my colleagues, I just have one, and you may have answered it within your introduction, but just if there's one thing that you could hone in on the impact, should you be appointed to the Capital Region Water Board, that you think that you could make?
Sure. Thank you for the question. Yeah, I mean, hopefully it's a big one. that would be the hope, but we don't always get what the things that we hope for. I think one is sustainability projects. Depending on the climate models you read, it's this part of the world is going to be an interesting place 30 years from now. As the climate changes, this is going to be a very influential place geopolitically. But that makes it incumbent upon us to make sure that we are building a resilient climate infrastructure for the things that are happening. We're only going to have more big thunderstorms in the summer that cause problems for our stormwater runoff. We are only going to have more people living here, which is going to create problems for our sewer systems. And in addition, as the climate evolves and changes, we have to make sure that we're preserving the access to fresh and clean water for all of our constituents. So just sustainability projects, I think, would be the biggest thing for me.
Thank you. At this time, I will open the floor to questions from my colleagues. I will begin to my far right, Councilwoman Rawls. Any questions for Mr. Davidson?
Thank you, President Bowers, and hello, Mr. Davidson, and thank you for coming today and being willing for us to ask you some questions. I was just curious to know, I'm always worrying about how do we on boards communicate with the community. I feel like we're left out a lot on things, or we don't know about certain things in the community. So as a board member, how are you going to make sure information, important details, or just to get our thoughts in the community, how are you going to make sure you do that outreach?
Thank you for the question. I appreciate it.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's an important one. I think first thing is a little bit of foresight. Again, thinking about how our thinking forward, we will be able to know that there will be some thunderstorms in the summer, right? We will be able to anticipate when there are periods of drought or whatever. So getting ahead of that and having a little foresight and making an active effort to get that out into the community is important. Working with community partners, whether it's elected officials like yourselves, elected officials at the state and federal level, but also community organizations, our churches, our fraternal organizations, etc. Tapping into those networks and asking them to help carry that message all the way out, or the last mile, as our infrastructure engineers would like to say. I think that's an important partnership to make.
Thank you. And just one more question. When reading your resume, I did see that you created some type of online voting or a easier way. So you're creative, little techie there. How can you implement that into being on the board with the water company? How could that help you affect the community in some way?
Oh, thank you for the question.
Mhm.
Well, it wasn't just me, it was a team effort. And I think it's important to take into perspective as well. Because it really is a team sport when it comes to those type of things. First thing is beginning to understand and listening to the community about what's not working for them and what they actually need to work better. So if we are going to make some technological change, which not all of our constituents or citizens are technologically adept, the first thing I would want to understand is what's not working and what needs to be doing better. So listening first. And then the second thing would be working with other community partners, try and come up with a solution that works for everyone or as many of us as possible. So listening first, collaboration second.
Thank you very much. That's all from me.
Thank you. Councilman Madsen, any questions?
Yeah, just one. So thank you for coming out this evening and in your interest in serving. How would you improve Capital Region water? Is there something that's a concern that you think that the board could do better, and how would you improve that? I guess.
Thanks for the question. I don't, I've been a consumer here and for the water system for going on 8 years. Haven't had a lot of complaints or problems. So I'm not running in, with a bunch of problems to fix. Having said that, one of the things I'd like to do or like to strive towards, right? Because Rome wasn't built in a day. One of the things I'd like to strive towards is expanded services, not just in the city, but also perhaps folding in other municipalities. That might not be feasible, but it's something I'd like to explore. And the economies of scale as sizes grow, costs may go down. So that's something I'd be interested in looking into. But again, I haven't had a lot of problems, but that's just me. I'm one guy. So I would like to listen to the community and see where those issues are and where to tackle those.
I'd like to actually have one more follow-up, and
Sure.
let me know if this is a potential conflict, given your day job. Something I think the state doesn't necessarily understand is the magnitude of our water system issue. And do you think you could potentially help us to educate the, whoever it may be, governor, legislator, that
Yeah, I'll
know.
shoot the governor a text right now. Just kidding. Thank you for the question. Yeah, I actually did check with our HR office and there were no conflicts. So I'll start there, as long as I'm not doing this on company time, taxpayer time, excuse me. So I did check there. There's no conflicts from that perspective. However, yeah, I mean, I'd love to take my knowledge and apply it here, right? And to benefit the whole community. And as I mentioned in my opening, it is an exciting time to work on infrastructure projects because there is a renewed interest in rebuilding some of these things that were sometimes built hundreds of years ago. So there's renewed interest and availability of resources. So I'd like to take my knowledge and apply it here. I obviously can't steer unilaterally state dollars towards any particular project. They don't give me a vote where I work. But I would bring that knowledge with me.
Just to follow up real quick, Neil, is it correct that the state, isn't there like the stormwater fee they're not paying right now?
The state has declined to pay the CRW stormwater management fee, which is for impervious surfaces within their boundaries, which is a lot of the boundaries that they serve. So it's a big issue. It's legally complicated because of the interpretation that it's a tax, but taxpayers don't pay taxes to pay taxes to somebody else. But it's an issue not just for Harrisburg, the CRW, it's an issue across the state, federal, state government, who have a big footprint in Pennsylvania, mandate these services, but will not contribute to them for any of the local municipalities or municipal authorities.
I guess what I can add on that, and thank you for the question, Councilman, is we have been in a period, though there's no guarantee on this in the future, of over projection revenues for the Commonwealth. And I can't speak to their budgetary habits and going forward, but perhaps starting a new conversation akin to the I believe it's a firefighting contribution that the state makes to the city. I don't know if they're still doing that, but maybe starting a conversation along those similar lines on the waterfront or other public services as well. The footprint of the state government is fairly large in Harrisburg, as we all know. So any way that they could be contributing would be helpful.
Yeah. Well, I would love it if you could apply your creative brain to figure out how we can have this Commonwealth be better. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice President Green. Any questions?
Thank you, President Bowers, and thank you for being here tonight and your willingness to serve. A couple of my questions have already been asked, so I'll kind of keep it to the simple question of how'd you hear about the board and what makes you want to be a part of it?
Yeah. So I was approached by a friend, someone who works in the administration, about the opportunity. And again, kind of going back to my biography that I started with, it kind of hits me on a couple very interesting notes, and why it was easy for me to say, yes, please put my name in. Because, one, that environmental stewardship piece is important to me personally. And then two, I also have, a background and experience working in state government and with other levels of government and with elected officials. It's kind of a nice combination there. And I thought it would be a nice way to put my skills to work.
All right. And then a question for the administration. Is this a vacant seat that's being filled, or is this filling a seat of someone who's currently on the board?
This is the nomination to fill the fourth expired term. There is one unexpired term remaining.
Okay, but not the vacant.
Which of the four is up to council? Because there's four
Okay.
nominations, but now there are four 4 expired terms, 1 is vacant. There are 4 nominations submitted by the mayor to the council for consideration.
All right. That's the question I had. Thank you.
Councilwoman Daniels, any questions?
Mine are all.
Okay, and Councilman Rodriguez, any questions?
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you for being here and thank you for your willingness to serve in the capacity. I have a question just about the, I believe it's the community ambassadors position with CRW. Are you familiar with the community ambassadors?
Not in great detail.
They have a group of ambassadors that kind of encompass the area, but when you go on the website, the representation isn't really spread evenly. How could you assist in that matter?
Oh, thank you for the question. I appreciate it, Council. Yeah, that's a good question. In my previous work, before I worked in state government, one of the things I was tasked with was recruiting candidates to run for public office. And one of the tasks that I was presented with was to recruit people who are reflective of their communities. That's always been an important priority for me. And it's something that I would bring to this board position and make sure to bring to the attention of the board members. And it's 2022. There's not really many excuses anymore for not living up to those values. And so I want to make sure that my feet are held to the fire, and I trust that the council members would do that. But also to make sure that we put our money where our mouth is and actually invest in those commitments and make them reality.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. No further questions, Madam President.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your time tonight. This concludes the work of the administration committee for this evening. So thank you. The next committee that you will hear from tonight is the Budget and Finance Committee. I will defer to Chair Vice President Green.
Thank you, President Bowers. The first item that we will be discussing tonight is Bill 10 of 2022. And Mr. Parker, if you wouldn't mind reading that into the record for us.
Yes. Bill 10, 2022. An ordinance forgiving and discharging city real estate taxes, including interest, penalties, and costs, and striking off tax liens for the properties 1510 and 1513 Market Street.
Thank you. I believe that our solicitor is going to give us a briefing, and I believe we have someone here from the Shalom House to represent them as well.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is a slight unusual request. I'm only aware of one other, but there was an administrative error when the Shalom House was expanding to buy additional housing for women and children in the city. And the tax exempt form, which they would have earned instantly, was not filed with the Dauphin County Tax Assessment Office. So tax bills issued for what was plainly tax exempt property. They brought it to the attention of the county, which is under a different code than we are. They issued the exemption and forgave any taxes that were due. We have to go through a different set of hurdles to get there, as does the school district. So there is a very old tax law in Pennsylvania that technically what you're doing is exonerating the tax collector from collecting the tax, which is the effect of forgiving it. It's the same we used when we had the sinkhole properties, when they become uninhabitable by the people that lived on the block, which both the city and the school district voted to remove those taxes because the people no longer had a home they could live in. So the exemption would be for this is not from disaster, but from actually being exempt. And because it was an administrative error, because they brought it up right away. But forgiveness is a legislative function, not an executive branch function. It has to come to the city council. So we got a call about this in the spring. It took us this long to just sort of be able to get it into the pipeline to get it done. But I think the Shalom House is well known to the entire council for their works throughout the city. I refer to them as doing God's work. So, they've been in front of you many times for many things. And so it seemed to be something that we were legal. We put this together and asked them to appear to confirm
that is what this is for.
Thank you. I don't have any questions at the moment, but if you'd like to give us an overview of the Shalom House and the work that you do.
Of course. So Shalom House is an emergency shelter for women and children. We're always at capacity. We have about 22 beds. We serve the family from the time they get in to the time they find transition out to permanent housing. From that time, these ladies come to us very broken. Some of them with basic needs, things like broken work clothes. So we start at where they're at. We them out into the best suitable option for them, whether that is another program transitioning them to like rapid rehousing or the Y. And we try to stay with them. So we've recently created programs, a mom support group, a recovery group for women that's a little bit smaller and intimate. So when those transition out of our shelter, they have a safe space to come into. We also more recently in March started a drop-in service. So our case management team is available that are in need of support with accessing different resources. So we've serviced several community members, utility assistance, helping them to connect with jobs or finding landlords or navigating rental assistance. We also provide permanent supportive housing for single women with a documented disability. And these women live out in the community, guys, the rent, and then they are partnered with the case manager and group activities. So they meet with their case manager bi-weekly. And once a month, they have a group activity where they all come together and kind of fellowship and work through different issues. We are currently in the process for the first floor. We are in the process of fundraising to be able to convert the sanctuary into a mixed-use house model so that we could have possibly transitional housing and more shelters.
Thank you very much for that overview of what the Shalom House does. I know some of the work that you guys have done. My mom has come in and taught classes through Penn State in the shelter. And you guys do a wonderful job working with the women that you work with, as well as the children. A lot of people don't realize how many women go to shelters with their children. And giving them that stability while they're still going to school, and giving them opportunity to still kind of be kids even through the situations that they're in is very important. So I thank you for that work. To me, this is it's kind of a no-brainer. It's an administrative error that needs to be corrected. I'll open it up to my colleagues for any questions or comments. I will start to my right here with Councilwoman Rouse.
Thank you, Vice President Green, and good evening. Thank you for being here, Mrs. Harvey. I just want to say thank you for the work you do in this community. To put more housing in a sanctuary is what God would have wanted you to do. So that it is a no-brainer. I know the great work you do. From being a teacher, I've had students who have had to come to the Shalom House. So thank you, because I've seen directly how you not just nurture their mothers, but you nurture the children too. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Madsen.
No questions for me. This seems pretty straightforward. Thank you.
President Bowers.
Thank you. I don't have any questions. I just wanted to thank Mrs. Kyla Harvey, Executive Director of the Shalom House, for being present tonight to share some of the expansion and other opportunities that you will provide for women and children within the city of Harrisburg. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman Daniels.
I don't have questions. I only have one for the administration. Should the resolution indicate the amount?
It's just the years. It's exempting, it's making it exempt. So whatever is there,
And so you don't.
there is not. So
Thank you, and Councilman Rodriguez.
Thank you, Chair Green. Thank you, Ms. Harvey, for being here this evening. And of course, thank you for all the work you've done with the young women in our community. Just brief question, is the exemption for the church that you currently are operating in, or is it the former building?
It's actually for the church.
Okay, no further questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no further questions, I would recommend that this is placed on our next legislative agenda. Thank you. And the next item that we will be discussing is Resolution 62 of 2022. Mr. Parker, would you read that into the record for us?
Yes. Resolution 62-2022. A resolution approving the second proposed 2022 budget reallocation.
Thank you. And then we have the administration here. We have Mr. Brooks and Miss Marita Kelly here to give us an overview and kind of go through the budget reallocation for us.
Good evening, council.
Good evening.
Good evening, council. Bring to you the second budget reallocation. This is more and truly a real reallocation in terms of we're only moving money from one account to another. A lot of these asks for the reallocation represent asks beyond our $20,000 threshold or movement from personnel accounts to other buckets. Start off with footnote A. Ultimately, what this ask is from neighborhood services. They're asking you to transfer $100,000 from miscellaneous contracted services to the demolition and clearing line and the neighborhood services account. Ultimately, this is just a situation where supplies have gone up with inflation and money has come short in terms of the things that they need for the demolition cost. So they felt the need of asking or requesting $100,000 in addition to be able to sustain through the rest of the year. Moving on to footnote B, again, it's with the neighborhood services and they're asking for $100,000 from the miscellaneous contracted services line down to overtime. That is a personnel line in terms of moving money from contracted services, which is the service line, to overtime, and the request of $100,000. We have to come in front of you so that we're able to move that money ultimately. The real impact of that is that I believe it was trash, just sanitation. I apologize. Sanitation services ultimately need this service so they can continue the service throughout on Saturdays and hours outside of regular working hours throughout the rest of the year. So that is the request for neighborhood services in regards to miscellaneous contracted services and overtime.
All right, I do have one question. I know we kind of discussed this yesterday, but it's just something I kind of caught as I was glancing over it. It looks like we're moving both from the neighborhood services, miscellaneous contracted services line item, both of these 100,000s. But it's showing for both of them that the balance would still remain 457,773. So would it go down to 357,773?
Correct. That is
right.
foresight from my apologies.
It makes sense because the money hasn't moved the first time yet because it hasn't been approved. So it's going to show the same thing, but just for a technical correction so that when we look at it in the future, it'll be down to 357,773. Thank you.
Moving on to footnote C, the codes department is requesting to move $5,000 from the office equipment line down to their overtime line. And ultimately, they have substantially received more rental fees. They'd like to be able to offer up overtime to their employees so that they're able to continue to get these overtime fees as it is a way the city is earning money or generating revenue. Therefore, their ask is more just for the $5,000 to be able to sustain for the rest of the year. And where the employees willing and able to stay over for overtime. Moving along to footnote D, the planning department is requesting $40,000 from their salaries and wages to be moved to their legal line. Here in the city, we've been doing, over the last few weeks, there's been quite a few or a lot more zoning hearing board meetings, and the litigation costs have increased. the times and what is needed for those hearing boards have increased. Therefore, to sustain throughout the remainder of the year, the planning department is requesting $40,000 in addition to that budget. Down to footnote E. And I'll have our accounting manager, Brian Cutchin also fill some of the information here, but ultimately, what's happening here that there were more medical claims in the beginning of the year, ultimately leaving us in a situation where we needed more money. And a lot of this is attributed to COVID, the impacts of COVID. I'm sure you all have heard long COVID and just impacts from the pandemic itself. So sure that is driving the increased medical costs, which leave us in a situation where we're needing $1.8 million. And what you see in front of you is where we are taking amounts from different budget units ultimately. So we have 68,000 from information technology, 53,000 from Bureau of Codes, 532,000 from police, 262,000 from fire. Traffic and engineering has 84,000. Vehicle management system has 126,000. Parks and Rec is for 91,000. That does not equate all the way to 1.8 million. The remaining amount will come from neighborhood services personnel bucket. Ultimately, it will leave the 584,000 to be transferred from neighborhood services into the general fund. They're being transferred to the medical line within the general expenses. But that's what all the footnotes within E here represent. And ultimately, that is the request being asked of the administration.
All right. And just to be clear, all of these are coming from salaries and wages. So this is money that we've saved through not filling positions or positions not being filled or not being filled for the entirety of the year. It's not pulling from like programming cost or anything like that. It's savings that we already recognized throughout the year. So we're able to move them to something else.
Any additional questions?
I will open it up to my colleagues to see if they have any questions regarding the second proposed budget reallocation. I will start all the way to my far left with Councilman Rodriguez.
No questions currently, but I may have some momentarily. Thank you, Chair Green.
Councilwoman Daniels.
Yeah, so I guess these are a lot of salaries and wages that we haven't hired for. Is there a reason why we didn't hire for these positions, or what happened? Did people quit?
Well, one of the dilemmas that we faced was an absolute shortage of finding competent and qualified individuals to fill the positions. And you can correct me if there's additional points that you want to make, Brian. But a lot of it is Joni has really struggled to find luckily the market has opened a good bit in the last, like starting around May or June, it started to open, but those first 3 to 4 months, we just were having real difficulty filling positions. And some of the police and fire were based on the timing of the training starting at the different universities. If you recall, the one university stopped the training. We had to go to another university. That took us some time for the police and the fire, something similar where there was a delay in the actual hiring of the new firefighters. They just recently graduated. It was like an 8-week training, but it didn't start until late April, early May. So that's, I mean, Joni can confirm this because she's the HR director, but we had that same issue in our own operation, trying to find qualified candidates because it's just an excellent market for employees to seek employment. And so there's more jobs than there are people, more people for a particular position than there are, people to actually fill the positions. So it's been a bit of a challenge for us.
And this is just like a memory refresher for me. I thought there was some restriction about moving money between neighborhood services and general funds, or the other way around. Was it? What
N-
were
No,
there were like,
there's some people that have raised questions of it. The third class city code's very clear that you can take money from a sanitation related account or utility that is not self, trying to think of the word, a water system and a sewer system and an electric system. The bill's supposed to reflect the cost of running the system and is limited to those ratepayers. Utility bills in terms of trash are not the same thing. And there's court cases about that. So it can be used to supplement a general fund, and a general fund can be used to supplement it. But they are split out because one is a tax and one is not a tax, but they're both revenue streams that come into the city.
okay, and okay. I mean, I guess we have to do what we have to do, but I'm a little uncomfortable with this transfer just because we already, our money from neighborhood services is already just like 32, 34 per month per account. I mean, I guess we just haven't had. I guess I'm concerned about what this means for our services, but I guess that's a separate. And that's it for me.
All right, thank you. President Bowers.
Thank you. I have a question regarding line item D for planning the additional legal fees that are needed. I was just curious. You mentioned that the zoning hearing board, there were additional meetings held, or do they anticipate additional meetings being held before the end of the year? I just wanted to clarify that.
The answer is yes.
Okay.
There's two of the largest set of plans that's ever been heard by either board going on right now. There was also a third party appeal on one of the zoning decisions that had to be defended up through the Commonwealth Court. I'm not sure that is over yet, but the zoning board is required by law. We have to give them their own counsel and pay for it. And once you get into litigation mode, you really can't control the cost of it. It is what it is. I will note they had an RFP for zoning council 3 years ago, and the then president, selected their own. There's no question it's much more expensive than it used to be. The hourly rates are higher. The amount of that goes into getting these done is just much more expensive. It's a hard reality that we have right now.
And we're certain that this will be enough for the remainder of the year, or do you
I think
anticipate?
there's nothing wrong to asking a lawyer to wait till next year for more of their money. I believe that the bill you have in front of you, we've only paid them through July and we're already in a deficit.
Okay, thank you.
And I will add that Jeff did review this pretty thoroughly and gave his analysis and recommendation.
Okay,
So I think that helps.
thank you.
Thank you. Councilman Madsen.
No questions for me, thank you.
Thank you. And Councilwoman Rouse.
Thank you, Vice President Green. Thank you all for being here tonight and explaining this. I don't have any questions. Mine were asked and answered. So thank you.
All right. I don't have any further questions. Thank you all for being here tonight. It looks like Mr. McCutcheons does have something he wants to add.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Green. Just as a follow-up on Councilwoman Daniels' comment about the Neighborhood Services Fund and also Neil's reply. You may or not recall, because it goes back quite a few years, back when the city, before the transition, solely had the sanitation fund. The city would take annually an administrative service charge from that fund into the general fund. It was to help offset tied in related costs. It was $811,000, and that was done consistently. Once the Neighborhood Services Fund was created, we did that for 1 year. We took half that, but in recent years that's been stopped. So that part of funds coming from neighborhood services to the general fund at that significant level has not been repeated. So this is it's similar. It's not the same, but it's a significant draw. You could liken it to the past when the city took funds from sanitation to supplement the general fund's needs. And also in doing this evaluation of salaries, we did take a hard look. We looked at the September payrolls, and based on the 6 remaining payrolls for the remainder of the year, we could project what we felt would be needed still without depleting these lines. We certainly don't want to do that. We want to have enough funds available for the remainder of the year within these specific budget unit lines. So, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for your presentation tonight. And thank you for the hard work that you continue to do. So I will ask that this is placed on our next legislative agenda. You guys have a great night.
Thank you. This time we will open the floor for public comment. Just a few housekeeping reminders. Please state your name, your address. If you don't feel comfortable sharing your address, you can share the vicinity in which you live within the city. You will have 2 minutes to share your comment, and Mr. Parker will serve as our timekeeper. I'll begin to my right. Is there anyone that would like to offer public comment? I am not. I did not make a referral for when it will be voted upon. None, in fact, none of the nominees have been, we've only discussed them in work sessions. You're welcome. So seeing and hearing no one on my right, anyone in the middle that would like to offer public comment? Seeing and hearing no one, anyone to my left? Seeing and hearing no one, council members, the time is 7:07 p.m. I will entertain a motion to adjourn. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. We stand adjourned.